Okay, what I want to do now is share with you what therapy looked like for me. Okay, what was my therapy? What did it look like? And I use the term therapy. We got to point out that in different countries, therapy means different things to counseling, which can also mean different things to seeing a psychologist. And I will often use the terms interchangeably, and it just be too complicated to explain how they mean different things in different countries. And so I saw a licensed counselor who also had a doctorate in counseling psychology and who was experienced in giving people trauma counseling. And I'm just going to refer to her as a therapist from now on. Okay. And what did it look like getting therapy from her? Well, to start off with, she was like, we need to make sure you're safe. We're not going to do any talking about your past trauma if you're not in a safe environment right now. And I was living in an environment that I was very used to, that seemed normal to me. But in the environment I lived in, I've been in a lot of dodgy situations, almost been stabbed a few times, been in quite a few dodgy situations. And so I was always kind of on the lookout for trouble in my neighborhood, even though I didn't know that was hypervigilance. That was a thing. And my therapist wisely said, we need to get you somewhere where you're safe, where it's stress-free, and you need to have a season of being cared for, and a season where you're not focusing on caring for other people, but you are being cared for. And so the job I had meant that there would be a regular focus on helping other people. And what I needed to do now was take a time out from that and be living in a location where I could focus on getting help and where I was safe. So that was the first thing that happened. And me and my family actually temporarily moved to another location. And I was also advised, don't tell too many people you got PTSD. So once I got the PTSD diagnosis, I was told, don't tell too many people because it will get exhausting having to keep explaining to people your situation. And so I didn't tell too many people, but in hindsight, I told more people than I should have. And what I found, and this was quite a few years ago, so hopefully things are changing for the better, but what I found was a lot of people didn't really understand what PTSD was, didn't have a good understanding of how to come alongside people with mental health and with problems and with trauma and abuse problems. And so I told too many people. And some of the people I told, I wish I hadn't, because it caused a headache for me. So I was told that don't tell too many people. And then the therapist I had was someone who's from the school of thought that your relationship with the therapist needs to be one that reverses the dynamics of abuse. So remember we talked before about how when you're abused, it impacts your relationships, your voice, and your power. So the therapist I saw believed it was very important that they were a safe person for me, that there was a safe relationship there where I could say anything. A safe relationship, but also a relationship where I was given a voice, where there was lots of listening and giving me a voice, helping me get my voice back. And also a relationship where I had power, where I had agency, where I had control to say, this is too many sessions for me right now, or I'm not comfortable with this approach, and to give me that power, which then that relationship reverses the dynamics of having your voice, your power, and your relationships mess with. So that was really helpful to me. And then basically, there were a lot of things that happened during the counseling, but basically, I was given an opportunity to tell my story. And so what I would do is the night before or the day before a session, I would look at my story. Now, I'd already written out my story. When I was a teenager, I wrote out everything that that happened to me, and I tried to process it back then. So what I did, I went back to my notes from years ago, and I would read through it so it was all fresh in my mind. And then the next day at our sessions, I would share my story. And the way I did it, I started at the beginning and went right the way through to the end. And at one point, my therapist said, you know, you don't have to go linearly through it. We can look at themes if you like. And I was like, I really want to go through it linearly because it's so hard to go through this stuff. I just want to have gone through it with a fine tooth comb and not have missed anything out, because I don't want to have to go back and deal with that stuff later. Now, in hindsight, I wouldn't have a problem now going back and dealing with stuff later. But that was the approach I wanted to take. And my therapist let me have agency and let me go that way of working through it linearly. And so I told my story. It was very hard at first to start telling my story to another person, but there was trust in the relationship, and the trust increased. And whilst at first it's very hard to put words to the unspeakable, over time it started getting easier, and I started getting mastery over my story instead of my story having mastery over me. Now, as I told my story, my therapist would give feedback. So she would listen really well. I'm amazed at how patiently she listened. And she would give feedback along the way. Say, when she heard about something that happened to me, she would say, that's not right. You should have been protected. I'm so sorry that happened to you. And these things are immensely helpful to have. Some people might be like, well, yeah, of course, that wasn't right. You should have been protected. Don't you know that already? But the thing is, if as a child you've said that's not right, and then you've been gaslit and told, quit your complaining, this is all character building, it's not that bad, you know, then what happens is you start thinking that, oh, so it wasn't not right. You start thinking it was actually okay what happened to me, and you don't feel as if, oh, I should have been protected. And then for the rest of your life, you can go through situations where you don't protect yourself because that's the way you've been kind of brainwashed to think. So it was massively helpful having this. And she would say things along the way like, that's not your fault. And at one point where I was like, I just wish I had fought harder. And she said to me, can you get a photo of you from that age? So I got this photo of me, of a little boy. And, you know, she just basically gently said to me, would you expect that little boy to be responsible for stopping the abuse? You know, I look at the picture of the little boy, I'm like, no. So that was massively helpful to help retrain my brain of how I'm thinking about the stuff that's happened. And so the whole way, what she's doing is reversing the dynamics of abuse. She's giving me a safe relationship. She's given me a listening ear where I say the stuff that I said years ago that didn't get listened to, and now it's being listened to. And she's helping me think correctly about what happened. And she's testifying that what happened was wrong. So it just really reverses the impact of abuse. So this approach is basically what you can call talking, time, and tears. You know, like the 3 T's, yeah? The process I went through involved me talking, putting words to the unspeakable, telling my story for the first time in a context where I would actually be heard, gaining mastery over my story so that my story hasn't got mastery over me anymore. And there was time. This took time. It was a process. Time given to me to look at these things when for years my body and my mind had not given enough time to properly process these things. And when these things happen in your childhood, you just kind of quickly pack it up in a bag, you know, and for the rest of your life, you're carrying this bag around with you and you've never properly gone through the bag to sort it out, you know, and see, well, what's in the bag that I don't need to carry around anymore, you know, what's in the bag that needs to be washed now, you know, and so on. So there was time to properly process things, and there was tears. So tears to actually mourn the stuff. So like most people, I started off therapy thinking, well, I don't want to start crying about this stuff because then, the floodgates are going to open and it's not going to stop. And then what I learned was that actually when bad things have happened to you, it's really healthy to mourn those things, to spend time mourning them, counting the losses and crying about them. And it's actually really a positive thing to do. So some of us have been kind of told, quit your crying, don't be a crybaby, and all that kind of stuff. And so we think we shouldn't cry. And then realizing there's things we've been carrying around for years that we need to cry about. We need to process it. We need to mourn these things. And then after the sessions, I would go in a park. I'd look at the beautiful nature around me. I'd pray. Then I'd go and make some music because that soothed me. And then I might do something fun with the kids, and then later on, I would then take a break. And then the next day I would look at my story again to get ready for the next counseling session. So I would have 2 counseling sessions a week. And the only reason why it was 2 was because that's what we decided. My therapist was like, we want to work out what can you handle. We don't want to give you too much that's then going to be detrimental to you. And we also want to make sure you get the most of your time. And we worked out twice a week was probably just about the right amount for me. So again, notice how my therapist was giving me agency, allowing me to be in control of the timing of things. And again, reversing that impact of abuse where we have our power taken away. I also learned some tools along the way that my therapist taught me, and some other things I picked up along the way. One of them was breathing exercises. So when I started therapy, I was very, very angry. I had an anger it was kind of like a new kind of anger I hadn't recognized before. It seemed an irrational type of anger. It seemed like a fire that would quickly burn up within me. And what I was taught was that if I do these breathing exercises, it's impossible to be angry whilst doing the breathing exercises. Now, this is a bit of a weird one because I hated doing the breathing exercises. So, you're doing an inhale for like a count of 7 or a count of 8 or something like that. And then you're exhaling for a long count again. And you do it, and it takes a while to calm down. And it's kind of infuriating at first doing it. You don't want to do it. And then you find I am actually calmer. Physiologically, it makes you calmer. So I learned breathing exercises. That was really helpful, especially because I was also quite anxious at the time. And another thing she taught me was stroking my head, starting at the back of the head, going down to the front. And that is very calming. And there's, there's neurobiology behind that. I found that a great thing to do. If something happened, like say, I remember one time a door slamming. It was a bit triggering to me, and then just going like that, it's not like a fixes everything thing, but it just helps you to soothe yourself and to regulate your emotions and to calm down. Another thing was holding a hot cup. You hold a hot cup like a hot mug of tea. The warm feeling on your hand can be quite calming. Another thing was reframing. So I said to my counselor that the suitcases were triggering for me, because suitcases made me think of going to boarding school. And so she explained to me reframing, how you could take something that's troubling you and reframe it, look at it in a different way. One way I picture this these days is, because I like photography, sometimes you're going to take a great photo of someone and then you realize the bin's right behind them. So you step a foot to the left, change the angle, you reframe it so the bin isn't in the background. The bin's still there behind them, but the way you're looking at it now, you're not focusing on the bin, you're focusing on your friend you want to take a photo of. And so I started thinking, how could I reframe this? And then I was like, I can see the suitcases as quality time with my wife and kids. When we get the suitcases out, we can spend time together. So that reframe was really helpful, and it was helping with my thinking, but also notice the way it was done, where my therapist gave me power to decide what the reframe should be, gave me agency for that. So that was really helpful. Another thing during counseling was about counteracting triggers. So there was actually a particular smell that was quite triggering to me, and I had to ask family members to please not use that product because the smell was triggering for me. And I've heard of other people, some people found certain tastes are triggering to them, and that is helpful to have an orange, nearby so that they could take a bite of the orange, and then it just helps with that trigger there. So there were other tools I learned along the way, which were really helpful for managing my symptoms for PTSD. But what also was happening the whole time was that I was having a safe relationship where I was able to use my power and where I was able to use my voice in a healthy way. And that period I went through was just immensely healing. So that's a story of what my therapy looked like. There's different approaches people take to therapy for trauma. What I would say is whatever approach you're going for, you want the therapist to be someone who you can have a safe relationship with, someone who gives you agency, they don't force you to do things you don't want to do, and someone who really listens to you and helps you to grow in your voice. And you really want those components in a good therapist. And so you might take a different type of therapy than I took, but you might still have those components there. And I would say that would be a wonderful thing to do. Okay, please remember, do some self-care after this video. Do something that cultivates beauty in your life, something that soothes you, something that brings you joy. And I'll see you on the next one. Take care.